The town of Hollow Creek had always been a quiet place, the kind of spot you only stumbled upon if you took a wrong turn off the interstate. With fewer than 2,000 residents, it sat wrapped in silence, hidden behind thick forests and long stretches of farmland. Outsiders described it as quaint. Locals called it safe. But what no one dared to say aloud was that Hollow Creek carried a hunger that came from one family whose name was spoken only in whispers, the Marrows. The Marrow farm stood on the outskirts of town, a sprawling property of weather-beaten barns, overgrown fields, and a two-story farmhouse that looked like it had been standing since before the Civil War. Its windows were always dark, and its doors never opened to visitors. Children dared each other to run up to the porch at night and knock, but few ever tried. Fewer still returned with the same light in their eyes. The Marrows were odd. That much was undeniable. Jonathan Marrow, the patriarch, was a broad-shouldered man with a face carved by years of hard work, or so people assumed. His wife, Margaret, rarely left the property, and when she did, her skin looked sickly pale, her smile too wide, as though she were rehearsing emotions she didn't truly feel. They had 3 children: Ruth, the eldest daughter, who moved like a shadow; Elijah, a boy with a cruel streak that showed even in childhood; and the youngest, little Caroline, who almost never spoke. People told stories about them. How they never attended church, though everyone in Hollow Creek did. How livestock sometimes disappeared near their land. How drifters would be seen walking down the road toward the Marrow farm but never out again. But these were just rumors, and rumors were easy to ignore. After all, there was no proof, no blood, no bodies. Just whispers. It was the summer of 1974 when the first real crack in the silence appeared. A young hitchhiker named Daniel Reeves was last seen outside the diner on Main Street, thumbing for a ride. He was 22, traveling across the country after dropping out of college, his hair shaggy and his jeans torn at the knees. The waitress, old Mrs. Crowley, remembered him vividly, his easy smile, his notebook full of sketches, his excitement about heading west. He left the diner just before sundown, walking toward the road that led past the Marrow property. That was the last anyone saw of him. Sheriff Harold Granger opened a file but didn't dig deep. Young men vanished all the time, he said. Probably caught a ride and left town without telling anyone. But Mrs. Crowley swore she'd seen headlights turn into the Marrow driveway that same evening, and that was enough to keep the rumor alive. Inside the Marrow farmhouse, Daniel Reeves was very much still present. He woke in the dark, his hands tied behind his back, the smell of mildew and iron thick in his nose. At first he thought he was in some kind of basement, but the air was too heavy, too wet. He tried to scream, but a rag stuffed in his mouth muffled the sound. When he rolled onto his side, his cheek brushed against something cold and sticky. It was then, as his eyes adjusted, that he realized he wasn't alone. Dozens of glass jars lined the shelves around him, each filled with cloudy liquid. And floating inside them, distorted and pale, were pieces of people. An arm curled against the glass, a face pressed in eternal silence, a tiny hand no bigger than a child's doll. Daniel thrashed, heart hammering in his chest. The chains clinked. A light flicked on above him. From the shadows, Jonathan Marrow stepped forward, his face calm, his eyes empty of warmth. "You're awake," he said. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "Good. We've been waiting for you." Daniel's screams dissolved into ragged breaths beneath the gag as Jonathan Marrow crouched down, his shadow stretching long across the damp floor. The dim light bulb swung above them, and for a moment the reflection in Jonathan's eyes looked like flame. He tilted his head, studying Daniel the way a farmer studies livestock before slaughter. "You'll have to forgive the smell," Jonathan said. "It takes a while to get used to it, but soon enough you won't notice." "None of them do." Daniel tried to speak, to beg, but only muffled noises spilled past the cloth in his mouth. His wrists burned from the rope digging into his skin. Jonathan rose, towering over him, and snapped his fingers. The sound echoed off the stone walls. Somewhere in the shadows, footsteps shuffled forward. A figure appeared, Margaret Marrow. Her pale face gleamed in the low light, her dark hair tied tightly back, her eyes black pools that never blinked enough. She carried a tray. On it were knives. Not the shiny kind from kitchens, but rusted, scarred things with handles worn smooth by years of use. Daniel's body jolted with terror as Margaret set the tray down beside him. She leaned close, her breath sour with rot. "Fresh blood," she whispered almost lovingly. "He's still full." Jonathan placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Patience," he said. "The children haven't had their turn yet." Daniel's mind reeled. Children. From the staircase leading down to the basement, 2 sets of footsteps descended. First came Ruth, tall and thin, her hair hanging over her face like a curtain. She moved silently, her long fingers brushing the walls as if she could feel the life in them. Behind her came Elijah, a boy no older than 16, but his grin carried the sharpness of someone who enjoyed pain. His hands clutched something small and twitching, a rabbit. Without hesitation, Elijah threw the animal onto the floor. Its legs kicked, claws scraping against stone. He pulled a blade from the tray and pressed it to the rabbit's throat, his eyes never leaving Daniel. "You see," Elijah said, his voice crackling with excitement. "They don't even fight for long. They just give in." The blade flashed and red spread across the floor. Daniel gagged on bile. Ruth crouched, dipping her fingers into the pool of blood, and smeared it across her face in lines that looked like war paint. She hummed softly, an eerie tune that seemed too old for a girl her age. Jonathan clapped his hands once, sharp and final. The children froze, waiting. His voice dropped low. "This one," he said, pointing at Daniel. "This one is different. He's strong. The last. We'll show him the family way." Margaret smiled wide, her lips cracking at the corners. "Yes. He'll understand." And then from the shadows came a sound that froze Daniel's blood. A small voice. Fragile. Almost sweet. "Papa, is he for me?" Little Caroline stood halfway down the stairs, clutching a doll with one arm missing. Her blonde hair was tangled, her dress smeared with stains Daniel didn't want to identify. Her wide blue eyes fixed on him with the innocence of a child asking for candy. Jonathan's face softened. "Not yet, Angel. Not yet. But soon." Daniel thrashed harder against the ropes, his chest burning, but it only made the family smile wider. The basement seemed to close in, air pressing heavy against his lungs. He realized something terrible then, something worse than death. They didn't just want to kill him. They wanted to keep him. And in Hollow Creek, no one ever escaped the Marrow family. The night in the Marrow farmhouse was endless. Daniel had no sense of time, only the sound of the dripping pipes above him and the shuffle of footsteps that came and went like clockwork. They never left him in silence for too long. Someone was always watching. Ruth would appear in the doorway, her face half hidden by hair, whispering words he couldn't understand. Sometimes she would stand there for hours, tracing invisible symbols into the air with her long fingers. Elijah liked to prod him with the tip of a blade, laughing when Daniel flinched, daring him to scream. But Caroline was the worst. She crept close when the others weren't looking, her doll dragging against the floor. She would crouch near Daniel, her tiny voice trembling with curiosity. "Does it hurt?" she asked once, reaching out to touch the rope around his wrists. "Papa says you'll teach me. Mama says I need to practice." Her small fingers brushed his skin, and Daniel pulled away instinctively. The little girl's eyes darkened. "You shouldn't do that," she whispered. "They don't like when you don't listen." Daniel didn't need more warning. That night, he stayed completely still, even as the hunger gnawed at his stomach and his muscles screamed from the restraints. But the true horror came when Jonathan led him upstairs. It was the first time Daniel had seen the farmhouse beyond the basement. The hallway was lined with animal skulls, nailed to the walls like trophies. The air smelled of smoke and rot, and every wooden floorboard groaned beneath their weight. Jonathan said nothing as he marched Daniel forward, a chain now fixed to his wrists and neck. Margaret followed behind, humming softly, carrying something wrapped in cloth. They stopped at the dining room. The long table was set, candles flickering at each end, their wax dripping down onto the wood. Places were arranged for 5, with pewter plates and bone-handled knives. At the center of the table lay what Daniel thought was a roasted pig at first glance. But the shape was wrong. The limbs were too thin. The face, what was left of it, was human. Daniel's stomach lurched and bile burned his throat. Elijah laughed, clapping his hands in delight. Ruth smiled faintly, her eyes unfocused as if she were seeing something far away. Caroline climbed onto her chair, kicking her legs happily. Jonathan pulled Daniel closer to the table. "You see, boy," he said, his voice steady and cold, "we don't waste. We take what the world leaves behind. Strays, drifters, forgotten souls. We give them purpose." Margaret unwrapped the cloth she carried, revealing a crude set of carving tools. She placed them beside the roasted body and handed Jonathan a long knife. "This one was a man," Jonathan continued, his blade pointing toward the corpse. "A thief. No family, no name worth remembering. But here," he gestured to his children, "he feeds us. He makes us stronger. And soon you'll do the same." Daniel shook his head violently, chains rattling, but Jonathan only smiled. "You don't get to choose, boy. The family decides." Margaret began to carve, her motions precise, almost reverent. She sliced the flesh into portions and placed them on each plate. The children bowed their heads briefly before digging in. The sound of tearing meat and smacking lips filled the room. Jonathan turned to Daniel, holding out a plate with a strip of steaming flesh. "Eat," he ordered. Daniel gagged, shaking his head, tears burning his eyes. Jonathan's expression darkened, his patience thinning. Elijah leaned across the table, his mouth smeared red. "Make him," Elijah said eagerly. "Make him Papa. He has to." Jonathan set the plate down, then gripped Daniel by the jaw, his fingers like iron. He pressed the strip of meat against Daniel's lips. The smell was overwhelming, copper and smoke mixed together. Daniel clenched his teeth shut, shaking, but Jonathan's grip tightened until pain shot through his skull. "Eat," Jonathan growled again, low and final. And then, from the far corner of the room, Ruth's voice drifted softly. She wasn't looking at the table but at the window, her eyes locked on the darkness outside. "Someone's coming," she whispered. The room froze. Jonathan released Daniel's face, his head snapping toward his eldest daughter. "Who?" he demanded. Ruth's pale lips curved into a faint smile. "A man. Looking for the boy." Jonathan cursed under his breath. Margaret's knife paused in midair. Caroline clutched her doll tighter, her wide eyes darting to the window as if she expected a stranger to burst through at any moment. And for the first time since his nightmare began, Daniel felt the smallest spark of hope. Someone knew he was here. The Marrow dining room went silent, except for the faint hiss of candles burning low. Jonathan's grip tightened on the knife, his knuckles white. Ruth's gaze didn't leave the window, her pupils wide as if she were seeing through the glass into the night itself. "Who?" Jonathan barked again. Ruth tilted her head, listening to something only she could hear. "Tall. Alone. He carries a light. He's closer than you think." Daniel's pulse kicked hard. Someone was coming. Someone alive. His chest filled with desperate hope, but it was fragile, brittle, like glass ready to shatter. Jonathan stood, his chair screeching against the floor. "Elijah. With me." The boy wiped blood from his chin with the back of his hand and grinned. "Finally." Margaret leaned close to her husband. "Don't bring trouble to the house, John." Jonathan's expression hardened. "There won't be trouble. We've dealt with worse." He grabbed a lantern from the wall and motioned for Elijah to follow. Together, they disappeared into the hallway, boots thudding against the wooden floorboards. For a moment, Daniel dared to breathe. If someone really was out there, if they could just reach the house in time. "Don't get excited." The whisper came from Ruth. She finally turned from the window, her hair falling back enough for Daniel to see her hollow eyes. "They never make it far." Caroline giggled softly, swinging her doll. "They scream," she said in a sing-song voice. "Papa brings them inside and then they scream." Daniel's stomach twisted. Whoever was outside, he had to warn them somehow. He shifted, chains rattling, the sound sharp in the heavy air. Margaret's head snapped toward him instantly. "Still yourself," she hissed. She rose from her chair, gliding across the room with unsettling grace. She crouched low, her face inches from his. "If you bring danger here, you'll suffer first. Understand?" Daniel forced himself still, swallowing his fear. But his ears strained for every sound beyond the walls. Upstairs, the front door groaned open. A new voice called out, firm, cautious. "Hello? Anyone here?" It was a man, strong, steady. Daniel's heart leapt. He tried to shout, but Margaret clamped a hand over his mouth before the sound could leave him. "Shoo," she whispered, her breath sour. "You'll ruin it." The floor above creaked under heavy footsteps. The stranger was inside. Jonathan's deep voice answered him, smooth and measured. "Evenin', sir. You lost." The stranger hesitated. "I'm looking for someone." Young man, 22. Brown hair. He was last seen walking this road. Silence. Then Jonathan chuckled low and easy. "Plenty of folks pass through here. Can't say I've seen one like that." "You sure he came this way?" Daniel thrashed against Margaret's grip, his muffled cries desperate. Ruth watched, her expression calm, almost curious, as though she were studying how long it would take for him to suffocate on his own panic. Above, the stranger's footsteps moved deeper into the house. He was searching. Jonathan's voice grew sharper. "I told you no one's here. Best turn back now." But the man didn't leave. He opened another door. A floorboard snapped loudly under his weight. And then came Elijah's laughter. The sound was sharp, cruel, echoing down through the house. "You should have stayed away," Elijah said. The stranger's voice hardened. What the hell? There was a crash. The thud of bodies colliding. Furniture breaking. The stranger shouted and Jonathan roared. Margaret released Daniel suddenly, standing tall, her lips curling into a hungry smile. Caroline clapped her hands in delight. He's here, the little girl sang. We get another one. Daniel forced the gag from his mouth, his voice breaking free at last. Run, he screamed. Run. Get out. The sound tore through the farmhouse like thunder. For the first time since his nightmare began, Daniel's voice was free. But whether it would save the man upstairs, or doom them both, was a question the night itself seemed eager to answer. The house above shook with chaos. A crash echoed, with splintering, glass shattering. Jonathan's voice boomed, Elijah's laughter rang sharp, and the stranger's desperate shouts reverberated down through the floorboards. Daniel's throat burned from screaming. Run. Get out. Margaret spun on him, her face twisted, veins bulging in her neck. She slammed him back against the wall so hard his vision flashed white. Shut your mouth, she hissed, spit flecking his skin. You bring their eyes here and I'll peel you alive. But her rage only fed him. For the first time since waking in this nightmare, Daniel had done something they couldn't stop. Someone else was here. Upstairs the fight grew louder. A gunshot cracked the air, deafening in the old house. Then silence. Heavy. Smothering. Margaret's head tilted, listening. Ruth froze where she stood, her body tense. Caroline stopped giggling, her little mouth hanging open, doll slipping from her hands. Bootsteps moved across the ceiling, slow, deliberate. Then a voice. Not Jonathan's. Not Elijah's. Where is he? Daniel's heart lurched. The stranger was still alive. Margaret's face darkened. She moved toward the stairs, her hands curling into claws. Fool, she muttered. He doesn't know what he's walked into. But before she reached the steps, Ruth spoke softly, almost dreamily. He carries light, she said again, her voice far away. And the light burns. Margaret froze. Her pale lips pressed tight. The stranger's boots descended the stairs. Shadows stretched long across the walls as the lantern he carried flickered down the basement steps. Finally Daniel saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, his clothes torn from the struggle upstairs. Blood streaked his temple, but his grip on the pistol in his right hand was steady, and the lantern in his left blazed with stubborn fire. He found Daniel immediately. Their eyes locked. Jesus Christ, the man muttered. You're alive. Daniel choked on relief. Help me, please. But Margaret stepped into the stranger's path, her face twisted in fury. He's ours. The stranger raised the pistol. His voice was steel. Not anymore. For a moment, the basement held its breath. The lantern light glimmered across jars of preserved flesh, across ropes and knives, across the pale faces of the Marrow children. Then Caroline screamed. It was high-pitched, piercing, a sound too shrill for her small lungs. The candles upstairs blew out all at once. The lantern flickered violently in the stranger's hand. Shadows stretched and writhed like living things. From above, heavy footsteps thundered. Jonathan's voice roared. Kill him. Elijah burst down the stairs first, his knife flashing, teeth bared in a mad grin. The stranger fired, 1-2 shots, and the boy crumpled, rolling down the last steps, knife clattering away. Margaret shrieked, lunging at the man with inhuman speed, her nails slashing for his throat. He raised the lantern between them, flames licking close, and for the first time, Daniel saw fear in her eyes. She hissed, recoiling as though the fire itself seared her skin. Light, Ruth whispered again, her body trembling now. It burns them. It burns. Jonathan appeared at the top of the stairs, his massive frame blotting out what little moonlight filtered through the cracked windows above. Blood streaked his shirt, but his eyes burned hotter than the lantern's flame. He carried an axe, its blade dark with years of use. The stranger leveled his pistol, but Jonathan didn't slow. Bullets won't stop me, boy. He charged. The stranger fired again, once, twice, 3 times. The bullets slammed into Jonathan's chest, but the man kept coming, stumbling but relentless, rage carrying him down the steps like a beast that refused to die. The axe swung. The stranger barely dodged, the blade biting deep into the wall where his head had been. Sparks flew as the lantern rattled in his hand. Daniel struggled against his chains, desperation tearing through him. Shoot him again. Don't stop. But the pistol clicked empty. Jonathan ripped the axe free, his grin stretching wide. You're mine now. The stranger raised the lantern high, flame roaring inside the glass. His hand trembled, but his voice did not. Then burn with me. With a violent motion, he smashed the lantern against Jonathan's chest. Fire erupted. Oil splattered across the man's shirt, igniting instantly. Jonathan roared, the sound more animal than human as flames consumed him. He swung wildly with the axe, his clothes blazing, his skin blistering, his voice filling the basement with inhuman rage. The heat washed over Daniel, searing his skin. Ruth shrieked, covering her face. Margaret scrambled back, her own scream breaking as she dragged Caroline into the shadows. Jonathan's massive form staggered, burning, thrashing. Then the fire caught the shelves, jars cracking, spilling their grotesque contents into the blaze. The air filled with smoke, with the stench of burning flesh, with the cries of the dying and the damned. Daniel's vision swam. He gasped for air, chains rattling as the stranger stumbled toward him, coughing. "Hold still," the man rasped. He raised the pistol by the grip and brought it down on the chains again and again until the metal snapped. Daniel collapsed forward, free at last, lungs gulping smoke and fire. The stranger grabbed his arm. "We have to move, now." Flames licked higher, devouring the farmhouse. Jonathan still writhed in the inferno, his screams shaking the walls. Margaret's wails echoed from the shadows. Caroline's laughter, horrifying, gleeful, twisted through the smoke. Daniel staggered to his feet, the stranger hauling him toward the stairs. But as they reached the last step, Ruth stood waiting, her eyes glowing in the firelight. Her voice was soft, almost tender. "You can't leave," she whispered. "No one ever leaves the family." The flames roared through the Marrow farmhouse, devouring the walls, the ceiling, the very history of the cursed family. Smoke rolled down the stairs in thick waves, choking the air. The heat pressed in from every side, blistering skin, filling lungs with ash. Daniel and the stranger froze at the foot of the stairs. Ruth stood above them, motionless in the firelight, her long hair whipping around her face like black ribbons. Behind her, the fire painted her silhouette in a halo of shifting gold and red. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice soft but carrying through the chaos. "The fire doesn't kill us. It frees us." Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. She lifted her arms, palms open, as if welcoming the flames. The heat surged forward, engulfing her in a crown of fire. But she didn't scream. She didn't move. She just watched them, her eyes glowing white as the skin on her face cracked and peeled. Daniel stumbled back, gagging. "Jesus Christ." The stranger shoved him forward. "Don't look. Move." They shoved past her, the stranger shielding Daniel as Ruth's burning body collapsed to the side. But even as she fell, her head turned, eyes still fixed on them, lips moving silently. A prayer? A curse? Daniel couldn't tell. The stairs groaned under their weight as they climbed. The heat above was worse. Blazing walls, beams collapsing, sparks raining down. Jonathan's scream still bellowed from somewhere inside the house. Deeper and lower now, more beast than man. "Out the door," the stranger coughed, dragging Daniel by the arm. They staggered toward the front entrance. Flames chewed through the hallway, devouring the animal skulls on the walls. Daniel's body screamed with exhaustion, but adrenaline drove him forward. And then she appeared. Margaret. She emerged from the kitchen, hair burned away, skin blackened in patches, eyes wide and unblinking. Caroline clung to her leg, untouched by flame, doll clutched tight against her chest. "You can't take him," Margaret rasped, her voice shredded by smoke. "He belongs to us. He always did." The stranger raised his pistol instinctively, but Margaret didn't flinch. She stepped closer, Caroline skipping beside her, both of them framed by fire. "He's ours," Margaret said again. "The family grows." Caroline's tiny voice chimed in, sweet as honey. "Come with us, Daniel. You'll like it. We'll never be lonely again." Daniel's knees buckled. The exhaustion, the terror, the days without food or water, all of it crashed into him at once. For one horrible moment he almost gave in. Almost believed the promise of belonging. But the stranger pulled him hard. "No," he growled. "Not tonight." He shoved Daniel toward the door, then raised the empty pistol like a hammer and hurled it. The metal struck Margaret in the temple with a sickening crack. She staggered, Caroline shrieked, and both tumbled back into the flames. Daniel and the stranger burst through the front door into the night. The cool air hit Daniel like a salvation. He collapsed onto the dirt, gasping, coughing black smoke from his lungs. The stranger hauled him up again, half dragging, half carrying him across the yard as the farmhouse behind them burned higher and higher. The fire consumed everything. The roof caved in, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. The screams inside, Jonathan's guttural roars, Margaret's wails, Caroline's laughter, echoed long after their bodies must have been ash. Finally, silence fell. Only the crackle of fire remained. Daniel slumped against a fence post, trembling violently. Tears streamed down his face, cutting clean tracks through the soot. The stranger knelt beside him, his own chest heaving. He wiped the blood from his forehead with a shaking hand. "You're safe," he said, voice hoarse. "It's over." But Daniel shook his head. His wide, haunted eyes stared back at the blaze. "No," he whispered. "It's not." The stranger frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel's lips trembled. "The little one, Caroline. She didn't burn." And as if summoned by his words, a sound drifted through the night. A laugh. High, childish. Carried on the smoke. The stranger's blood went cold. He turned toward the tree line. There, just beyond the reach of the firelight, a small figure stood among the shadows. Blonde hair tangled, doll dangling from her hand. Watching. Waiting. Caroline. Her lips curled into a smile too wide for her face. And then she whispered, her voice sweet as a lullaby, though the words slithered into their bones like poison. "We'll find you." The forest swallowed her. The fire burned on.